So far we've learned about how to look at your workspace, we've learned how to put some variables on your workspace, and we've also started navigating around in working directories. The core part of what you're going to be doing when you use R, however, is using what are called functions. So this video is going to be all about, well, this video segment is going to be all about what are functions and how do you interpret a function when you see one written down. So you could think of a function in the same way you would think of clicking a prompt in your GUI. So GUI is just your interface. So, if I wanted to save a file, I would go here, click File, Save. I would type in the name of it. If this was like Word or Excel, I might change it to output as text, something like that. And so you're clicking all those things, you're making all these choices, and then you hit OK. A function works in kind of the same way, except instead of doing all the clicking, you're just typing it out. In order to learn more about functions, we're going to play around with the function hist. This one makes histograms. So first, just to give a good definition, a function is something in R and other programming languages too, but I want to be specific to R for now. It's something in R that takes none to many inputs, so you could tell it nothing but the function, or you could have multiple arguments to the function, and it produces one or more outputs. So in the case of a histogram, you give it data, that's its input, and it outputs a histogram. So you can actually open up a function and see the code that's used to do this transformation. But the great thing about functions is that you don't have to do this. Somebody wrote this function already to do these common things you need to do in statistics. The trick for you as the user is just to learn how to use functions, how to be function savvy, as it were. So one thing to notice in R, and we've already seen some of these, is that all functions are followed by parentheses. So here I typed in ls earlier. You can see ls is actually a function, and you put the parentheses after it. So anytime you see something like that, that's a function. Anything that's inside these parentheses are what I'm calling the arguments. So these are the inputs you're giving to the function. I've already used functions like ls right here, or remember from previously, list.files. These just had parentheses with nothing in it. That's because these functions don't require any arguments. Most functions, however, are going to require at least one argument. So hist is a function that requires exactly one argument, and that argument is the data that you want to create the histogram of. So for illustrative purposes, you can see up here, I just created some fake data. I kind of just hammer around in the middle of my number line just to create some data to play with. I even called it fake data. If you feel like you really need to type these things into R to follow along, feel free to just either hammer around yourself, or if you want, you can type this in exactly. You don't need to. This isn't about learning histogram at this point. We're going to cover that when I go through the script for lecture 3. What I want you to just pay attention to is just learning how to parse what I'm doing with histogram, and also just how to navigate function help in general. So before we actually use hist, let's learn a bit about it first. So notice when R opens up, I mentioned this, I think in the very first video I made, every time you open R, you get this stuff. So you've got some disclaimers in here that R is not responsible for blowing up your computer, blah, blah, blah. The thing I wanted to point out to you though is down here. So it tells you can type help for online help. So notice help has parentheses around it. Help is a function. So help is a function you can use to learn about functions. I know that sounds circular. I've actually never tried to call help on help. You probably could, but we're going to use help right now to learn more about hist. So you can type in help, and then within your parentheses, you're going to want to give it an argument. So I want to learn about hist, so I'm just going to type in hist. So I'm going to hit enter. You can see in Mac, at least, when I do this, I get a little window that pops up. I've seen in other platforms that put this information into the console itself, so be prepared for either one. It should be the same information. You can see this is actually from the R documentation. So whoever created this package graphics that hist lives in wrote this description for this function so that when people use it, they can learn more about it. So they'll all have a description. So this is just what it does, generic function that computes a histogram. What we care about right now is usage. So you can see for usage, it says hist, and then within the parentheses, it gives it an argument x, comma, and then dot, dot, dot. So this means that hist requires this argument x because it's listed here. The dot, dot, dot means there are other things you could put in here. There are optional arguments that you can use to dress your histogram up, but really the only one it needs is x. So whenever you use help and look at the usage will show you which ones you have to have. So some will require more than one argument. Hist, though, only requires x. And then this one kind of shows you, by default, these are actually all the arguments that hist can take. You can see there's a lot. All of these that I've just highlighted, since you don't have to provide them. When you don't provide them, it defaults to these ranges, in case you're wondering, but really you can ignore this part. What it's important here is just to understand, if I try to run hist without giving this X, it's just going to yell at me. Actually, let me just show you what that looks like. What happens if I try to run hist like this? Argument X is missing. So now you can scroll down, you'll see arguments, and it just lists them all. So it lists, the first one it lists is X. So in case you didn't know, I told you ahead of time what X was. It's the data. So hist requires X. You can go down X. What is that? It's a vector of values for which the histogram is desired. Vector just means list. It's just the group of values for which the histogram is desired. So you can actually, instead of X, type in a list. You can see here, though, I created this variable fake data that contains my list. And then you can keep going. So I'm not going to show you most of these. We will play with some of these optional ones just to show you what they do. But you can see there's a lot. And then you keep going and it will tell you some details. As a beginner, this might seem incredibly intimidating. So don't feel like you need to dig in. I mean, it even gives you references to, I guess, the person who first made a histogram in a program. Yeah, you don't need these. I will say, if you keep scrolling down, you will find things like examples. These can be incredibly handy. So you can see, here's an example of a histogram, and they actually made the borders pink. Like you can see all the different options being used. But for now, let's just play around. So let's run hist with as few arguments as I can. So let's just run a hist on fake data. I'm going to hit enter. And you can see it pops up. Sometimes histograms will pop up with no axis at the bottom, no x-axis. If you just resize it, it'll pop in. I don't know why it does this, but this is how we fix it. So you can see what it does by default is just calls it histogram of fake data. Here's my histogram. It looks like I was skewed in my hammering on the keyboard. Frequency, so this is the number of times that appeared in the list, and fake data is the name of it. So if I just give it the values, you just get the plain histogram. But you can fancy it up by using some of these optional arguments. So what if I wanted to change this and change, so what if I wanted it to be something different? So let's find the optional argument that lets us do that. And I know it's optional because I got it to run without using it. So sometimes this won't be clear. So I'll say, if you didn't know that XLab and YLab stand for X label, Y label, this might seem completely opaque. This is where the examples come in handy. So let's try adding an optional argument. So we're going to add a label to our x-axis. So for that, this argument is called xlab. Since it's optional, you want to be really clear and actually type xlab equals, just so R knows of all the potential optional arguments you could have picked. And remember, there were a lot of them. I specifically want to add xlab. For the ones that were required, we didn't have to do x equals here because R knows that for this histogram function, the first thing has to be x. Or if I give a first thing without specifically saying it's x, it's going to be x. So x label, what do we want to call this? So this is numbers on keypad. Notice I put quotes around this. This is because this is a string. These are a series of words. The quotes just tell R everything within the quotes. I want that to be equal to xlab. And then it'll take xlab and put that as the label of the x-axis. We'll set ylab to number of times smashed, not shamed, smashed. And let's go ahead and give it a title. So main is for making a general title. So let's call that fake data example. So you can see now I've got my function hist, and within the quotes, I have 4 arguments. I have the one I have to have, the data, and then I've got 3 optional ones that I've made clear which ones they are. So I'm going to give you an xlab, that's my x label, ylab, that's my y label, main. And then hit enter. And it doesn't pop up because the window's already actually open. So one thing to keep in mind when you make multiple histograms is if you just make one with one slot, like here, I didn't create the specific slots to put in multiple histograms, it's just going to overwrite your old one. Now you can see I've got a non-generic title, fake data example, and then now this has been numbers on keypad, the X label's been changed, and the Y label's been changed. It's in these optional arguments where the true power of R comes in. I can do all kinds of things. There's actually an argument that will put a smoothing function. It'll put like a curve around this data to show like what would it look like if it was kind of normalized. If you do a scatter plot like you guys will be doing later on, you can actually put a line over it so you can see the general regression line on top of it. These are all optional things that make the graphics so powerful. But really all you need to understand at this point is how to figure out what's required and what's not, or how to figure out when someone gives you something. So for example, and the scripts that Professor Conway provided during lecture 3, and we'll go through those again, so don't feel like you should know those yet. But when he gave those to you, he just gave you this whole thing. I mean, without maybe not these exact option arguments, but he showed you all the inputs he did to get his histograms. So what you can do now that we've talked about this, you should be able to look at those and say, okay, that first thing, that's the data. These other ones are labeled, so I know this one did that, etc. So it's about learning how to interpret scripts that are given to you and then also how to create your own. And it's an ongoing process. So I learned these kind of things by looking up examples and looking at help and generally just Googling around. But hopefully this video has made the idea of a function clearer, how it differs from a variable. So a variable is something you're working with. A function is something that creates outputs. And so hopefully this made this idea, while it looks scary, just think of it as if you had a histogram box that someone had popped up and you had to type in fake data as the data and then fill in these optional arguments as well. It's just all typed up instead.